Hey, you did it. You made it back to another Playful Humans podcast. Thank you for listening. I'm your host, Mike Montague, and my guest this week is Alma Derricks. She's with Korn, Ferry Consulting, and we're going to be talking with her about how to spark playfulness and innovation in existing large companies. Sometimes they're not playful. Sometimes they try to be innovative, but they make that work a little bit difficult. And we're going to find out what we can do about it here today. Alma is senior client partner at Korn Ferry in the consulting, consumer, and culture and change. And I think I hit all of them. Communications. There's 3 official C's in there. We'll find out what those are here in just a second. Here we go. We like to start with the joke of the week here. The joke of the week this week is brought to you by drug testing. I passed my drug test last week, and I need to call my dealer about that. We need to have a talk. How many ears does Captain Kirk have?
How many ears? Wow, you went with a Star Trek joke, Mike.
I did, ears? Just for you.
I don't know.
The 3, the right ear, the left ear, and the final front ear.
Oh, okay.
Do you have a joke for us?
I do. Mine is an old joke. So on, for the youngins among us, before Jimmy Fallon, before Jay Leno, were the hosts of the Tonight Show, there was someone named Johnny Carson, who's a legend, and he had a whole bit where it was Karnak the Magnificent, and he would guess the answer to the question and then tell you what the question was. So this was one I remember from high school that was one of my favorites. So the answer to the question, he put it up to his head, sis, boom, ba. And then he'd open the envelope, and the question was, what is the sound an exploding sheep makes? Little window into my twisted soul there, Mike.
The Amazing Karnak was great. I need to do more that way with my sponsorships for sure. Okay, now we hit it. It's culture, change, and communications. This is the C3 division of Korn Ferry's consulting group. But you have also worked on a lot of interesting projects. So I'm not going to lie. The reason you're on the show is there was Star Trek in the bio. That's why I picked the Captain Kirk joke for you. So let's start there. You've had a really interesting career with Cirque du Soleil, Mattel, comics like Dilbert and Peanuts and the Blue Man Group, and working with some really, innovative and fun and creative companies. But I'm wondering, did you have fun jobs in there? Sometimes people end up as like the accountants in those jobs, and it's not fun at all. Or sometimes I've heard, especially in the toy industry, what seems like it would be fun making Barbie dolls ends up being really hard, like high pressure work to deliver results. How did you get into these businesses, and what was it like?
Well, I started my career. I've done a lot of entertainment, as you mentioned, a lot of entertainment brands. Worked at HBO way back in the day, right out of school. So, but the thing that ties all of those together, Mike, is the fact that in every one of those places, from HBO to today, and even Cirque du Soleil, I was responsible for taking them into some new space. So all the way back at HBO, the then chairman and person who created HBO, Michael Fuchs, looked out of his window one day at Bryant Park in New York City and said, we should do a film festival. And that was about it. And so that kind of thing would land on my desk, and we would figure out how to do a film festival. And so it was the beginning of this long string of things where in all of those cases, with all the brands you mentioned, I was there to help them do something different on the edge of the company that they've already been in, beyond the final frontier, right? So, with Star Trek, to answer your question on that one specifically, it was taking Star Trek to the internet for the first time. This was early days. I'd done it for Dilbert and for Peanuts, very early days. So my first website I built in 1994. So Netscape was brand new. And 4 months out, we launched on April Fool's Day with a website full of comic strips on a new platform that didn't have a lot of great visual content yet. We were way before video. And so I got plucked to come to Paramount and do the same thing for Star Trek, for Entertainment Tonight, those kinds of things. So I think what ties them together is the fact that in all cases, playful or not as an environment, creative or not, when you're doing something on the edge of the company, it's always a little dicey because you are stepping on toes and territory, and also working uphill with people's general sense of not being ready for that kind of radical change all at once. So it's been a
That's
great
so cool. I did a lot of that too. You might be about 5 years ahead of me based on your references, but I started making websites when I was in high school, and I took the Kansas City Chiefs radio broadcast online for the first time.
There
And
you go.
we started putting up the local grocery store chains coupons that were in the Sunday newspaper.
Right.
We started posting them online on Wednesday. And it was the 5th most visited website in Kansas City. 100,000 people every week would come print their coupons off online when you could finally start doing that and get them a few days ahead of time. And it was a really fun experience and a really fun changing time for me. But I'm wondering about for you and your personality. Are you somebody that likes that adventure and the challenge, or were these groups just happened to be ones that were doing that? And I guess the question is sort of, maybe I found 2 types of people. One that are like playful and fun, and you're seeking out groups like Cirque du Soleil and Star Trek, or people that just like adventure and challenge, and these seem to be innovating opportunities in these groups.
Well, I absolutely am drawn to those inflection points and to things that are kind of off the paved road. I think that's been a theme for all of these. And, some were ones that I sought out a little bit. In some cases, even at Cirque, I created a new business for Cirque while I was there, even though I was already being hired to help them take a turn with new ownership and sort of just navigate being 35 years old, being not a new brand anymore. So what does that look like, and how do you take that to market? But I think that I've always been attracted to it, partially because there are no rules there. When you are, sharp elbowing your way up through corporate, there's a different game that you play to kind of work your way through the tournament that is corporate America. And the thing that I found is when you are doing something completely different and on the edge, because there are no rules, because a lot of the structures aren't there, if you know what you're doing, you can have an opportunity to just leapfrog. And that was just like for you. I mean, the internet was a place where there were no rules at the time. There wasn't anything that was settled. There were no standard sizes for banner ads and things like that.
Yeah.
And so I think instinctively, kind of the entrepreneurial part of me enjoyed kind of the big wide open spaces of it, but it also gave me a lot of room to run and just kept letting me dive into the next one and the next one. And I think eventually you earn a reputation for being someone who can navigate that, because it's different to do it in an established company. You have a lot more rules to follow. You have legacy things to navigate. You've got history. But I really do enjoy that as an interesting guardrail to figure out how you balance the 2 things. Someone like Charles Schulz believed for all the world that those Peanuts characters were his children, his living blood children. And so anything new and different you wanted to do with them, imagine doing that for your own family, right? And so explaining this scary, dark place called the internet, I don't understand what that is. It was a process to get that franchise kind of to move into the space. And Star Trek went to Microsoft first, the old Microsoft network first, before we took it to the internet. And so that was another kind of interesting transition to kind of go through take an established brand through another company out into the world in a space, Mike, that the biggest challenge with Star Trek is that fans, maybe you, when you were in high school, were doing amazing things online. And so the hardest thing for Paramount to do was to keep up with all the fans who had already done databases of characters and all the shows and analysis of shows, doing fan fiction. We couldn't, how do we stand out in that, even though we're the official site? How do we stand out in that? And so again, you're always kind of pushing and pulling with the powers that be that run the overall Star Trek franchise to figure out what new things we could do to just be different and just make some noise. Because fans.
Holy cow, you are definitely speaking my language today, and I have about 8 follow-up questions from that. So one, I totally agree with you. When I was taking the Kansas City Chiefs online, they gave away the advertisements to the online stream because they couldn't understand it. They were like, well, we sell radio commercials. We're going to sell the radio commercials and do these free as added value. We'll also play those same radio spots on the internet. And it was a fine way to start, but the very first broadcast had over 100,000 people listen to it. Giving away that for free is a really great added value to your advertisers. And they've since figured that out. But I think also with some of those, you see that people just don't understand. I like the Star Trek story that I tell a lot of people when in social media. I wrote a book on LinkedIn, and social media was another one of those kind of open spaces that you could run in. And a lot of companies were worried, well, what if our employees say something dumb? And I'm like, well, your customers are talking about you online, whether you're in the conversation or not, like you
Right,
mentioned with Star Trek. So we
right.
might want to hire some of those nerds to make our content. And we might want to make sure that we have a voice out there that's equally as strong and creative as what they're doing. So I guess this is where we can really dive into your expertise is some of these big companies. You've worked with other ones too that maybe not as creative as the fun ones that I like and the big names and splashes. But when you're in these big kind of Fortune 500 companies, you may either feel like a cog in the wheel and your job isn't very fun, or if you had an idea that would make it better, expressing that in a way that's risky for you and your career can be tough. But also sometimes even when they have good ideas, getting everybody on board to execute can be a tough thing because it's just we explain it. I'm in a 50-year-old company with Sandler in my day job, and we talk about it like either changing the wheels on a race car that's already heading down the track and it's not going to stop, or changing direction on the Titanic. You've got this big momentum and big ship to turn, and it's not necessarily nimble. How do you think about these challenges, and do you have any advice for us if somebody's listening like, man, I really want to go do this cool thing?
Yeah, I think I'd add a third one to it that is real in corporate America, which is to do something new, you're taking that budget away from someone else. It's very
Mm.
zero sum. So I've seen things get off the ground, but ultimately sort of crash because everyone else there's the new thing, and either someone from the outside or the inside, it doesn't matter. Someone who's responsible for that new shiny thing gets their budget by getting it carved out of 10 other budgets.
Yeah.
And those 10 people sit there with their arms crossed, sucking their teeth, waiting for the whole thing to crash. And so you've got to make sure that you're bringing everyone along because you're starting at a deficit when something new like that happens. They have their kingdoms, they have their territories. So I think that's one thing that to be aware of, because it's not just about the quality of the idea. It could be a great idea, it could be a fabulous idea, but if you don't have sponsorship and you don't have executives on board and you have someone who's pounding the table for you, it gets really hard. And I think, the smaller the organization, the easier it is to kind of get those players around the table. But there's a constant, you're never done with those conversations. At United Media, where I did Peanuts and Dilbert and those kinds of things, we had a relatively small company, but we were doing something that flew right in the face of the business we had with newspapers, where we were selling those strips to newspapers. So there was a lot of wrangling in the early days about, for example, the way we finally got the thing to go was we made an agreement with our own syndicate salespeople that we would embargo our strip, we would delay our strip 2 weeks online to give newspapers a chance to have the first position. It wasn't optimal. It wasn't what we wanted to do. On day one, that's not the way you really wanted to go to market. It kind of undermines the big splash of being the same day and date. But it took a while for those things to catch up and for people to realize that the day it's printed, by that afternoon, you might as well, put it online. It's free and clear. But we were taking back those rights. We had newspapers that wanted to publish them as a part of their print rights. And I had to go toe to toe with some of the earliest papers that were earliest to the web who got it and say, you can't have that anymore. We're putting that on our site because we have a whole other business over here. So I think you have to anticipate that just expect a lot of pushback. I think the starting point thing is to expect a lot of pushback and expect that if you've got this idea, you're going to have to sell it and sell it and sell it and resell it and walk it around a lot to kind of get the buy-in that you need. And even then it could, another casualty in big companies is it's not big enough an idea.
Yeah.
So, at some point, if you have an idea, but we could make $1 million doing this. Well, $1 million is rounding error in a lot of big companies. It's not a big enough idea to really make the grade. So I think it shouldn't stop you. it shouldn't stop the energy that you have for it. But I think companies don't do a good enough job finding ways to encourage that kind of creativity without just squashing it and just, making people go, well, forget it then. I'm not, if I have a good idea, I'm just going to, I'll pursue it on my own. I'll make it a side hustle. That's what's happening now.
Right. That happens a
If
lot
you have
of
a great
people
idea,
taking
just
it
take it
outside.
outside. Mm-hmm.
I think there's, some upsides to that too. So two things come to mind. One, this podcast for Playful Humans, I wanted something where I can express my voice. I have another podcast called How to Succeed, and it's got over 3 million downloads and stuff for Sandler, and it's great, but it needs to be in the Sandler brand. And it's harder for me to play and experiment there and try new things or new guests that aren't going to be really great when you're going to have 5 or 10,000 people listening to it. So I think there is tremendous benefit to doing it as a side hustle or trying something else or doing it without the budget and saying like, let's see how this goes, getting an experimental thing going. But the other thing I heard while you're talking, I know I saw on your website, you're a fan of Seth Godin, and he's one of my favorites. And he talks about taking the responsibility for it. My tactic has always been like, great, put it on me. I'll do this huge live event with 10,000 people. If it goes bad, that's on me. You can fire me. But we're going to do this live. We're not going to make it lame and record it. And we're not going to put this out over here in the same channels we've always done. Like, let me go for it. And then if it doesn't work, we'll talk about it then. But don't stop me from trying before it even fails, right?
No, exactly right. And I think you have a better chance with things that people don't understand. If they're not really in the podcast space or they're not in social, you've got a chance to be a little bit creative out on the fringes a bit, because there's no one competing with you for that side hustle. They're not competing for that territory. So that's another thing to look at. I mean, I tell college students all the time when I talk to them about their careers that one of the things that allowed me to jump, as I said before, was stepping out on something that I was a de facto expert in, even though you'd have thought I created the internet just because I had AOL and CompuServe and Prodigy running on one laptop, but I knew more than everyone around me about it. And so for people now, whether it's, something with social or something with even TikTok and video apps and things like that, you've got to recognize that even though it seems second nature to you, that's what makes you such an expert at it. The people in companies are your parents' age. The bosses you're talking about are your parents' age. So no matter what they say and no matter how they posture, this is new to them. And it's second nature to you. And so it sounds like I'm giving you the advice that, well, because you know how to use a telephone, you have a special superpower. I know it sounds reductionist, but that thing that you knew that you grew up with gives you an instinct that no one else has. You could put three tweets in front of a 13-year-old. They'd know which are good and strong and which ones are kind of lame. They'd know it instinctively, even if they're not marketing professionals. They just know what plays well.
Well, I think that'll take us here to our second half of the discussion and talking about flow state and things that are easy for you and stuff. And in this play work, it comes up a lot on this podcast that I think for me, I've always hosted things. I hosted the morning announcements, in high school and did fake radio shows as a kid and all kinds of different things that for me, this is easy. And you would think, okay, well, I can't make a career in that. Like, that's silly. That's something I do for fun. And I've interviewed just hundreds of people that have made careers out of that, whether it's somebody drawing a comic strip or doing funny voices for cartoon characters or magic or something. I can't be a famous musician or magician or any of those kind of things. And I've kind of found that it is tricky. It's counterintuitive that thing that is most easy for you is probably your sweet spot. That's the one that can be most powerful to even a large organization. And it doesn't seem right. It feels like it should be a challenge. Can you talk a little bit about how you create work that you love and work that's unique to you?
There are a few things that I think you have to unlearn as an adult that you learn in school. And one of them is the sense that whatever you do has to be monumental and climbing Everest. Like, that's what you're taught. You're competing with, depending on how far you go in school, right? If you're getting a PhD, now you're competing with all the lions in that industry, in that discipline. And you've got to now say something completely new with your thesis that's never been heard before. And everything is hard. And in fact, in real life, the answer is do the thing that is the thing that comes easiest to you is fine. And I think we feel guilty about it. I think that's what you're getting at, Mike, that you just
Mhm.
somehow feel like, well, I didn't really try hard. I just sort of wiggled my finger and, I got paid for that. Somehow that feels dirty or wrong or something. But I use the example of a surgeon, right? If a surgeon knows how to do something and can knock it out in 5 minutes, you're paying them lots of money for those 5 minutes of expertise. They have to think about it, and that it's boring for them. It's the thousandth procedure. That's exactly what you and I want. You want someone
Mhm.
who's that comfortable, that confident, and can just knock something out. But I think we have to unlearn it. It's one of those things that gets beaten into us, that things that are worthwhile, things that you get paid for, work is supposed to be hard and work. And I don't think that has to be true. And you have to kind of trust that piece of you that has that talent and that has that instinct, because it's something that you can't replace easily, and you just have to find the right environment that appreciates it. I mean, I've gone from so many different environments, whether it was places I was working full time or as a consultant. Sometimes people don't see or appreciate that some piece of you, some fundamental piece of you. That's not your fault. That's the environment not seeing that. I could go down the street to a different place and like, oh my God, we love that you can see in all these colors at once and that you've had all these experiences. We love that and want you to just keep doing that. Be you. And so sometimes you have to have just have the guts to step out and find a different playground. It's not always going to
Yeah.
happen in that one space. It may not be the right fit. And when it's not, you're not probably not going to change them.
There's so much there because I think there is this, like, especially in corporate America, this hustle and grind culture, and that if something is going to be valuable, it's got to be really hard, and we have to work 80 hours a week and stuff. And maybe that innovation, maybe that new idea is easier. Maybe it's having AI do 80% of the work, and our human capital gets back to something that's more interesting for them, or more creative. And so a lot of times I find that creative answer is one that flips it on a switch. Rather than being 80% hard work and 20% interesting, it's now 80% interesting and only 20% hard work. And people, it feels weird to them. It feels like that shouldn't work, but oftentimes those are the ones that work 5-10 times better and gives your company a really huge advantage.
Yeah, but it's new and it's different and it's not the way we've done things before. People get very
Mhm.
habitual about things, right?
Yeah.
When I was at the LA Times, we had to solve for a whole thing with the way we printed in color our section, and there's all sorts of complicated math that I won't bore you with how you place color when you're printing a newspaper so that there's color on the front page and the back page and the internal pages. You can't even do it with a computer. There are human beings that can do it on a piece of paper. And we used to, for this one particular special issue, we used to flip and flop, and we didn't know how long it was going to be. And you're going up and down by 4 pages, and it was moving the color around. And finally, when my first year running it, I just looked at everybody in the room, and there are 20 people, and this is always just a big mess and a big fire drill for the company. And I just said, why don't we just lock the pages now? Let's just pick a number. Where are we? We're at 88. Well, let's just call it 96 and stop. Just call it that. And the whole room paused. They're just like, but what if we only have 90 pages of advertising and I said, well,
Yeah.
we'll fill it with public service announcements about reading. Like, we have all sorts of things we can fill space with, but let's lock it and not keep throwing ourselves into disarray for a week. And everyone was looking at everybody, and so they were just terrified to just make the call. And so I picked up the phone and I
Yeah.
called the head of the plant that prints the paper, and I said, can we do that? Can we just lock it? And he went, sure. And we went, okay, it's done. But just the shock and awe in the room of, oh my God, I mean, you don't have to stay up all night and shuffle things around and like work till the last minute. It's exactly what you're talking about. It was an easier answer, and yet everyone was trying to hit this mark so perfectly that the good enough was to say, if we have an extra page or two, we've got content, we can put something there. So
Yeah. It's so funny.
it's counterintuitive.
And one of the examples in my career was actually the opposite. In printing these big workbooks for corporate trainings and stuff with hundreds of people, they're like, well, full color is going to be too expensive, and we have to buy these in bulk and major. And I was like, guys, I don't think you realize the world has changed. You can print these in full color and have them shipped directly to the client with like 7 days notice. you don't need to order these 7 months in advance and keep a stock warehouse full of all of these books and things. We can just stop all of that. And it really takes people a while to believe it. They're like, wait a second. And then, well, what do we do with all this inventory here? I was like, we'll get rid of it. Don't worry. We'll use it. And moving to electronic workbooks and things too from a publishing company was huge. And all of those things are mostly fears and scares. It's just managing those fears and able to do something else. But I'm wondering if you have any advice for us in really, if we're burnout and we're bored in a career. I think that's another big theme of this podcast is that people may have done something that they really enjoyed, and now they're 5-10 years into this thing and it's just the same repetitive job, and they have ideas, but they've gotten shot down, or they've given up trying to innovate in these things and they're kind of just stuck. Do you have any advice for those types of people?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think before you give up on a place, as much as we talk about, and we both know, and listeners definitely know how hard it is to change a place. And so, so it sounds like the next advice is just then leave. It's not, it's not a place for you. And sometimes you do have to leave. But before you do that, I think it's worthwhile to go back to your leadership with a fresh idea. You may have something you've always wanted to do, or there's some problem that you think you could solve, but it may need a new role. It might need, a new small group or some kind of SWAT team to work on it. I think it's worthwhile to at least take that shot, and come up with something that scratches a different itch for you. It could even be things like, I've said this to people who are looking at new roles and new jobs, and they're thinking I've kind of hit the wall on the salary part of it. What can I do? What else can I do to make this worth my while? Well, if you like to speak publicly or you want to write a book, could you get support from the company to allow you some extra time to write this book? Could you get some latitude and maybe some travel budget to start going out on the road and representing the company, at conferences or things like that? There are budgets all over the place that you can tap. And I think the thing to keep in mind is that it's not all about the salary. It could be something where you're starting a whole new PR effort, or you're starting something in the community on behalf of the company at schools, if that's something that fits and has a strategic purpose for your company. If there's something that's being undone, it's worth the shot to write it up and kind of propose it inside and see how far you can get. And I think that kind of thing can be a shot in the arm and lets you stay in an environment that you know really well. You're not just jumping off into the deep end of something completely new. It's always nice to have some adjacencies. And if they let you scratch a different itch and kind of move through the company in a different way, and if they value the fact that you've got some longevity and you've got, knowledge and relationships in the company, it's worth giving that a try before you jump off. Now, if that doesn't work, if you get pushback, if you don't get the kind of support that you think you need, you might need to start scratching the itch with a side hustle of some kind. The same thing that you mentioned. There are things that you can try and do, but you do need to re-energize yourself if you're just burning out and getting bored to tears with the thing that you're doing. But I've always said it's worth trying to help that company along, because not many people raise their hands to do that. Most people go along to get along. They will not raise their hand. They won't challenge it. They won't throw out a new idea. So it stands out. I think it's something that folks will see and kind of recognize as something unusual. So it's worth a try before you go running and screaming.
Yeah, I think for me, the other thing that I would suggest is, I forget whether it's Green Day or Weezer. Maybe somebody can correct me in the comments. I could be completely wrong. But they have the song lyric, "If you're bored, then you're boring." And I think some of this is that personal responsibility. Like, you can gamify your own work, or you need to think of a way to do it better, and stop waiting for your company to magically give you this amazing opportunity. Like, how is it going to be any different at another company if you switch jobs, or you've been wanting to do something different for a long time? How come you haven't taken action on it? And giving yourself that permission to go take some risks, to shake some things up, to try something new, start a side hustle. I think sometimes it's really hard. We all want to be fulfilled from one thing, and it might be that you're just not having enough fun outside of work, and that you got a really great job that pays the bills and amazing benefits. Keep that part, and then find out how to, go climb mountains, or, swim with dolphins or whatever on the weekends.
There's a really interesting conversation going on now, and I think COVID really pushed it right over the edge with really asking yourself, do you want your job to be your identity? And
Yeah.
maybe I just heard an interview with an author who's written a book called, a good enough job or something. I can't remember the
Hmm.
exact title. And maybe by reframing it and saying, what kind of job do I need to, and what kind of money do I need? What kind of income do I need to pay for my lifestyle, pay all my bills? And that's fine. That's enough. I'm not looking for this work to be everything. And part of that hustle culture um, kind of mythology that you mentioned is that somehow it all just gets rolled up into one big ball. And there's a movement and a much larger conversation we're starting to have about just right sizing the part of your life that does work, and then you stop doing work, and then you continue to do other things that you want to do without the pressure of woodworking or dolphin swimming or whatever it is that you want paying the bills. It's okay if
Yeah.
it doesn't. It's great to do things that have absolutely no financial compensation involved with it. It's freeing. So maybe it's on us to just think about that. In some cases, those things I think cross over, and they're things that do make those hours that you spend working really personally fulfilling. In other cases, just don't put the weight on a single job in a single place to do that, because the problem is those companies at the end of the day can let you go. That company can
Yeah.
fail. That company can have a bad year, and you're completely wrapped up. Your entire notion of yourself is wrapped up in that job. You can't leave that to someone else. You can't leave that outside of you. You can't have let that much control over your own personal sense of well-being live outside of you, especially in an economy that's volatile and not going to get less volatile anytime soon.
Love that. And thank you for joining us. I think that's a great place to start wrapping up. But before we let you go, we're going to play a game. Do you want to play a game?
Let's play a game. Sure.
All right, here we go.
Okay.
We didn't talk about this one, but I have some awkward questions for you. I feel like you're
Okay.
an awkward question, like a would you rather question.
All
So I
right.
have 3 of these for you. If you share all 3, I'll give you a free 30-second commercial for anything that you want to share. Any ways you can help us or we can help you. So the first question is an easy one. Would you rather be hot or cold?
Ooh, cold.
Really? I feel like that's the same answer for me. You can always bundle up, but you can
Always
only.
bundle up. Nothing you can do if you get sweaty. Yeah, can't come
Yeah.
back from that.
All right, we'll make this a little bit tougher. What would you rather eat for dinner? Raccoon spare ribs or a deep fried gerbil?
Oh, God. Oh, God. That's Mike. Yuck.
I think really it's barbecue or fried here is what I'm going for. I
I
think
guess
I
I'd
would
go
go.
barbecued because that's kind of caveman, like, I guess. Sort
There
of.
you go.
I don't know.
I'll eat just about anything deep fried in a beer batter or something. So I
Fair
think I'll
enough.
go that way.
Yeah, if you cover, well, so you didn't mention the beer batter. See, you didn't mention that changes
Yeah,
everything.
not whole. Yeah, these are prepared dishes for sure.
Ouch.
Okay, now this is a good one. I like to know what kind of person you are.
Okay.
If you hear or notice a prowler lurking outside your window, what are you most likely to do? Take action, scare them off, or just call the police?
Oh, take action. I'm totally Action Jackson on that front. Yeah.
I am the opposite on that one. I'm locking the closet door and I'm calling the police on the cell phone. They can figure it out.
No,
All
I
right.
totally try and scare him away. Maybe it was a raccoon. So, you never know.
That's true. You have dinner out there. Who knew?
That's right.
All right. Thank you for playing along. I appreciate it and the great conversation today. Again, we've been talking with Alma Derricks, and she is a senior client partner at Korn Ferry's Consulting. And you can find them at kornferry.com in the culture, change, and communication division there. Anything you can do to help us or we can do to help you? Final thoughts here, Alma.
Oh my goodness. No, I mean, just keep doing what you're doing, Mike. I mean, I think we need these conversations. I think we need to keep saying this stuff out loud because it's not something that we put out in the airwaves. And I think people struggle with this internally. So yeah, keep doing it and don't ignore those instinctive things. Don't ignore those flutters in your belly. Those are trying to tell you something. So run with it.
I love it. Great stuff there. And I totally agree. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep going. Keep being innovative and changing big companies and making cool stuff for us Star Trek nerds and Peanuts fans. I'm also dangerously close to a blue man. So, you know,
you're right there. You're right on the cusp. Like just a little makeup and a little head nod in.
Yeah, it just needs drums and some blue makeup.
It's there. I can hook you up. We'll talk about that.
Until next time, if you need more information, go to playfulhumans.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, and we'll see you next time.
Live for today. Keep on chasing the sunshine.